Our next presentation moving along in this session is entitled Scientific Evidence of Healing Through Prayer and Its Impact on Health, brought to us by Julio Padovan. Julio Padovan was born in Brazil and has been studying Spiritism since the age of 15. He holds a PhD degrees in biochemistry and molecular biology from the School of Medicine of São Paulo University, University of São Paulo in Brazil. He moved to the U.S. at the invitation of Professor Brian Chait to work at the Laboratory for Mass Spectrometry and Gaseous Ion Chemistry at the Rockefeller University in New York, where he currently holds the position of Senior Research Associate and Associate Director. Julio is responsible for translation of Spiritist books from Brazilian Portuguese and French into English, and he is a member of the Spiritist Group of New York, where he is responsible for the Sunday Study Group. Julio is also a lecturer for Spiritism and General Sciences. Welcome, Julio.
Good morning, and I'd like to thank you kindly for the invitation so I could discuss with you the scientific evidence of healing through prayer at this symposium. I can understand why I was given this particular title from my credentials, but I must confess that I had a great deal of difficulty trying to put this into perspective, to such an extent that I actually thought of changing the title altogether of the talk. And I decided on that. But then I realized that I would be, I went so many lectures in my life where I'd chosen to be at the lecture because of the title, only to realize later on, to my surprise, and usually a bad one, that the speaker had changed the title. So I thought, well, then I shouldn't change it at all. And then, torn between these two extremes, I eventually decided I will change the title and I will not change the title. And this is what I came up with. This is the new title of the talk. Okay? And I hope that I can explain to you why I was so reticent about this particular title. And we have 4 points to discuss today. I don't have many more slides. I like to talk and interact with all of you. So I have 4 points that I think, 4 major issues that I think are very important when you're talking about prayer, and particularly the repercussions that prayer has on healing. The very first one is prayer itself, the very concept of prayer, which is the central topic of this symposium. We have a tendency still to look at prayer from a religious point of view. That's one of the things. When I say religious, I don't mean that this is necessarily bad, but with it comes a lot of ritualism that eventually takes away that communication that Assisi was talking to us, Assisi was explaining to us, that communication with the Creator. We become so attached to the ritual that we forget what we were praying in the first place and what we were praying for. So we have this religious background, then we have this problem of the ritualism, and then the other thing about the prayer is that it's usually a petition. Now, there's nothing wrong about asking for something, but the problem is that as a rule, we have a tendency that when everything is going well in our lives, it's because of our own merit. And when something is not going well, then we ask for something. And we remember that there is a Creator. We remember that there are higher order spirits that could assist us. So this is another point that I'm always concerned when we talk about prayer. Of course, we are talking here generally, and for the general audience, not just for us, but everyone. The other point, and the last one about prayer that I don't like, and I think it's the most critical one, is the idea that we always have of a barter. Prayer is still seen a lot. Again, we're not talking about Spiritist prayer, we're talking about any type of prayer, or as a bargaining position, We want something, and maybe if I do this, I can get that. And if I do that, I will get something else. So I would like to propose a different type of prayer, a different concept of prayer. So this is the prayer that I discussed right now, is the one I'm going to call old style prayer. What I would like to approach for this particular talk is actually the prayer that we will understand as the manifestation of the will of our spirit. In other words, if you prefer with a very short sentence, a prayer is nothing more than the language of the spirits, our truly native language, the language that we saw that allows us to communicate with the Creator. But not only that, being a part of the will of the Spirit, it is also that which allows the Spirit to interact with universal cosmic fluid and manipulate, shape, mold it into so many things, into those resources that we just spoke about, into those resources that we need to be able to carry out our tasks. So it is the language, but not just the language with words or sentences and grammar or an oral language. It's much more than just something that is just oral. Like I said, as the manifestation of the will of the Spirit. And having defined this new idea of prayer, I'll be as bold as to say that all of you, without a single exception, without any exception, all of you prayed this morning. But how is that? I don't remember kneeling down. I do not remember meditating. I do not remember uttering special words or thinking more clearly about this or that, or even asking for something. Well, we all did. Those of you, for instance, who drove here, you actually prayed for green lights and for light traffic. Those of you who took public transportation prayed that you would be on time, or that the bus or the train would also be on time. And those of us who walked here, right, we prayed for the weather to hold, for good weather. So we wouldn't need an umbrella, or we wouldn't come here drenched, right? But then you might think about, what is he talking about? He's just defined prayer in such an abstract and beautiful way, and all of a sudden he is equating prayer now with something as banal, as mundane as praying for the weather. Does he think that we can control the weather? Does he think that we can control the traffic lights? No. And this brings us to the second issue that I think affects the idea of prayer in the healing environment, in the healing context. It is this idea that we always confuse destination with our journey. So the destination, of course, was to be, the destination, we always think as the journey, all in one. And it's not like that. So when we prayed for the traffic lights in that example that I gave, a very simple example, or when we prayed for the buses to be on time, this and that, that is a destination. But what we really think about there is the ability that we would have of being here, of interacting with each other, learning, having new experiences. That was what was behind the traffic lights. That was what was behind the bus running on time, or we being on time to get to the bus, and so on. So it's not that banal, mundane example, but something even higher in terms of importance. And we see this in our lives. We see, for instance, how important that is, and how difficult it becomes when we actually confuse the two. I'll give you a more general example. As we all set goals in our lives, as we become attached to those goals, it's so interesting that we can even use this to explain to some extent how we create the concept of time, our concept of time. As incarnate beings, and at this level of our development, we are still extremely dependent on the XYZ in space and the fourth dimension, time. We cannot live without it. And we always find it very difficult when we read books and we talk about the high order spirits, and we see that they have a different concept of time. So let me try to see if I can explain to you how we can create the concept of time when we confuse the journey with the destination. Imagine a set of individuals that have set out to achieve, to reach a particular goal, and that they try once, twice, maybe a couple of times. It doesn't really matter how often they do it. But let's say that they fail at it. And because they fail, they become embittered, they become despondent, even depressed. At that particular moment, they set themselves in the past. They set themselves because they are always looking around and seeing that everybody else who did not partake of their choice in that destination and did not make the confusion between the destination and the journey, those people are moving on and leaving them behind. They see those moving away from them by looking at their backs. It's like the rapids of a river. Part of that water can actually go into a creek and even become stagnant. That water, that little amount of the water that moves away from the main stream, the main body of water, and becomes stagnant or just runs not as fast, now that is the water that is stuck, is now running behind the mainstream. These are the individuals whose lives are always characterized by the past tense. They are the ones defined by, oh, if I had reached that point, if I had done that, if I had achieved this. So they're stuck at that particular moment. On the other extreme, we have those that create the future. But here, we don't say create the future with that positive idea of positive thinking, progressive thinking. No, it's a negative connotation. Those are the individuals who set out to reach a particular destination, and they make of that destination their raison d'être. That destination becomes everything for them. They lose themselves. They immerse themselves so much into that destination that they lose themselves. They lose their individuality. They are only defined by the destination that they had set out, to accomplish, to reach. So they are always waiting for that to happen. These are the individuals who are, that can be described by the future tense or by sentences such as, when I reach that point, when I get this, when I get my diploma, when I get my financial independence and this and that, which are all valid destinations. But what we truly need to understand is that it is the journey. And of course, between these two very disparate situations, these two extremes, we have a plethora of intermediate stages, a whole spectrum of intermediate stages and states. And the most constructive one, I prefer the word constructive, not better, not worse, but constructive one, is actually the ones where the individuals set out to reach a particular destination. Because at our level of development, we still need the destination, all of us. Otherwise, what happens is that we are like children, and we get overexcited about everything. So if we don't have a destination, we don't focus our energies, we don't focus that will that I spoke about at the very beginning, and we cannot accomplish much. But these individuals, they set out the destination, but they understand that the destination is nothing more than the mere consequence of the law of cause and effect. And because of that, they pay attention to the present moment. They pay attention to every step that they take in that direction, knowing fully well that those steps are already making that destination happen for them. And when they don't reach that particular destination, they are not concerned with it. They don't become despondent because they realize how much they have learned, how much they have grown, how much they have developed in trying to reach that destination. So they look at the present, they look at every single step instead of being so concerned, so consumed with that final point. And this is very unfortunate because these individuals are actually rare, even among Spiritists. Society, human society, our society, does not realize this difference between a journey and a destination. And this brings us to our third issue, the one of success, how we define success. We define success in our society as those individuals that have reached the destination. No one asks how they did it, what they had to do to reach that point. We only ask ourselves, have they done it? Have they reached it? Have they accomplished it? And that's it. And this creates many pathological states in all of us as incarnate beings and also as discarnate beings, because it moves all the way up to our spirit. And how is that so? Think about the individuals, for instance, that become so afraid of being deemed as unsuccessful, as losers, that they do one of two things that are very similar. Either they set no journeys and no destinations whatsoever. They cross their arms and wait for life to pass them by. Or they set out to accomplish very little things so that they have a guarantee that they will always be successful. And they are, because they don't set out to do very important things. And what happens is that they miss the opportunity of growing, of developing. They still accomplish a few things, but very little. This is one extreme. Now we look at the other extreme, and those are the individuals who only see that destination. They see nothing else but the destination. When they try that, it means that they will do anything in their power to reach that point, because it's the point that matters, not the journey, which means that we should be very careful not to cross their path, because otherwise we'll be run over like an ice cream cone by a school bus. Okay, no mercy there. So in between these two pathological states, we also have a gigantic number of other states. And again, we call our attention to the state where the individual understands that there is a destination, understands that there is a point to be reached, but that is how the individual is progressing, how the individual is behaving. It's a behavioral idea. It's a behavioral approach. How the individual is behaving throughout the process to get there. The process itself is the journey. The destination, as I said, is a consequence. When we talk about all this, the question that is probably in everyone's minds is now, what do all this have to do with healing and prayer? Does he know he's in the right place? I am. I'm sure I am. So here's the situation. When we define success as reaching the destination and not we don't talk about the journey, what happens is that then when we are talking about healing in this life, the cure in the physical realm becomes the success, the definition of success. And that is completely irrelevant. We know that because our diseases are all the way into our spirit. Our diseases are simply a spirit that has not developed that will enough to be able to know how to manipulate the universal cosmic fluid and produce a beautiful statue as its spiritual body, which will then move on to create the physical body. So having, let us say, an incomplete will, or a will that doesn't know how to manifest itself completely, that spirit produces a spiritual body with, let's say, a few deformities. Don't think of deformities here as deformities in the sense of physical deformities. Think of them as imperfections in any possible way, moral imperfections or physical imperfections, but imperfections nevertheless. It's like giving me some clay with no artistic attributes whatsoever and asking me to to build or to create a statue that would make Phidias proud. Of course, it's going to be a horrible comparison. It would be even a sin just to compare the two. So it's the same thing. It's the spirit whose will is not developed enough. The language that that spirit uses to manipulate the other side, the universal cosmic fluid side, is not enough to create a body that is perfect. That is passed on to the physical body, and that is what we see here as the disease states, the infirmities. So then, if we look at a cure, we have to go back to the causes, and the causes are in the spirit, not in the physical body. So let us think now about a situation where an individual looks at the process and not at the destination, where the individual actually look at that particular infirmity with active resignation. I am not saying here that the individual cannot cry, or that the individual will not groan and moan while in pain. Some individuals go through excruciating, indescribable amounts of pain, moral or physical, sometimes both. It's not that, but it's an individual that throughout the process has active resignation. It's an individual that shows an understanding of how much that can contribute to himself or herself in terms of the progress that they can make. It's an individual that tries with all his or her power, not to say why me, to prevent themselves from saying why me, why now, or a favorite when we try to address the issue by blaming something else. When we say, oh, but I'm responsible for so many people, now if I get sick, they are going to suffer. Are we sure about that? Or isn't it our own petition not to be sick? So these are the individuals who look at the journey. They suffer. There is no question about it. But they suffer knowing with active resignation that if they do it, they understand it. They are treating the infirmity at the spiritual side. By treating the disease at its cause, they uproot them and extirpate them. And then something interesting happens. By modifying themselves in their essence, they are now capable of will transformations at the spiritual body level. That spiritual body now is going to relate to the physical one. And here's where the situation diverges. If the physical body has still enough vital fluids, that physical body will be able to incorporate the new model, the new template that is coming all the way from that will of the spirit. And in this life already, in this reincarnation process, a cure, a real cure, will be achieved. However, if now that physical body is too depleted, is past the point of no return, is past the point of being fixed, a cure will not be achieved here. But when that individual goes back to the spiritual realm, it goes back to the spiritual realm without the infirmity in its spiritual body. So a cure has also been achieved in that case. However, because of the definition of success that we have, especially in our immediatist human society, the first case where a cure is found here, that one is positive, the individual is successful. In the second one, because we don't take the other side into consideration, that individual is actually a failure. That particular situation is seen as a failure, as a lack of success. We can think the same way when we talk about individuals, for instance, that are now not constructive. They only look at the cure. And now here we have two possibilities. One, the individual is not going to receive the cure. That's the easiest one to think about, because they are not changing themselves, so they are not uprooting the causes at the spiritual level. And then they are deemed failures, they're deemed unsuccessful. But here's the tricky part. Imagine that for some reason, the set of circumstances changes, it changes ever so slightly, so that the individual receives not a cure, but an apparent one. I would like to say a respite. But if the respite, the period, the break between the infirm state and the non-infirm state, if that period is long enough so that the individual ends up passing on or going back to the spiritual realm, all right, by other means, not from that infirmity, that individual will be seen from our side, from the physical side, as a success rate. But when he goes back to the spiritual realm, because the causes are still there, all that is waiting to happen is that another set of circumstances to set off those causes again. And if that happens, that individual will develop the infirmity once again, and for a second, a third, a fourth, a fifth, as many times as it is necessary by the set, there are as many times are necessary, not because we are trying to blame or because we are trying to punish the individual. It's because the individual as a spirit has not learned. The individual as a spirit doesn't know how to will a better spiritual body. A spiritual body that does not have those infirmities, those deformities. So that individual has the deformity in himself, actually I would say itself, since the spirit doesn't have sex. So that individual, that spirit, has the deformity in itself. And until it learns how to correct them, how to improve, how to become better, it will not be able to will a better spiritual body and consequently a better physical one. It doesn't know the vocabulary. It's like if we want to make a very, very crude analogy, when we try to start a new language and we want to say a lot of things and we get very eager and we have no vocabulary. Or we have the vocabulary and the words are all disjointed because we don't know the grammar. So that is the situation when we have an infirmity. So why am I talking about all this, and why was I so reticent about this particular title? Because the work that is out there, the articles, and a lot of the work, and here I'm talking about serious, honorable, honest work. Let us not waste time when people fudge the data to actually prove one point or another. When you read these serious works, what you see is that they all say the same thing. The results are inconclusive. The prayer, we cannot ascertain whether the prayer really helps or not, or doesn't help. But that is because we are looking at these things with these distorted optics. We are myopic. First of all, what is the concept of prayer? Then we have the problem of confusing journey and journey with destination. Is it the cure that matters, or how we behave in order to achieve it? And then the third one, which I believe is the worst, is the fact that we look at success as the cure, the apparent cure here in the physical realm. We don't ask what happens when we go back to the spiritual realm. So we miss half of the cases that are positive, and we count a lot of negative cases here that are just respite, that are just temporary or apparent cures, simply because the set of conditions has changed. And it's very difficult for us to control all the variables. So these results, actually, when they are honest, they should be inconclusive. They should be, because we are not measuring the correct parameters, and there is no amount of statistical analysis that will force it honestly to one side or the other. Finally, there's the fourth issue, which is the one about the prayers for somebody else. And it's quite interesting, because whenever you're at the Spiritist Center, we always talk about, oh, we're much closer to God than we are from our original point. I always find that statement rather empty, to be honest with you, and kind of useless because it's a validation, it's a psychological validation. Oh yes, I've done my homework. I've gone through half of, so maybe I can slack off right now. And that is probably why I don't like it so much, because I would have a tendency probably to slack off if I thought that I had already done at least more than half. Because think about it, when you say that if I say that the tank in my car is a quarter full, it's because I know what a full tank is and what an empty one is. So I can define anything in between. But we say that we are eternal. We say that our journey is eternal towards our plenitude. So we don't know where the end is. And we barely understand where our beginnings are. So if we don't know any one of the extremes, how is it possible for us to say that we are halfway through or past halfway, past the midpoint? It's very confusing to me and makes no sense. So I would rather think we're still children, all of us, because this at least gives me an idea that I have adolescence, I have the rest of my childhood ahead of me, the rest of adolescence. And it also allows me another interesting thing. It's a psychological avoidance coping mechanism. It allows me to say I can make mistakes without being so concerned about them because I'm an adolescent, I'm a child, right? So we often see when people they want to pray for others at Spiritist Center, and they ask if it's possible. And it is. Of course it is. We are not in no way against the prayer for somebody else. And then we always say, well, but is it effective? Is it efficacious? All right. So let us talk about, is it efficacious? So if we're talking about efficacy, yes, it is. Because efficacy is the application of a particular device or measure for the correct problem. In this case, it is. We are willing something good for somebody else. There is no way anyone here can find something wrong with this assertion. Now, is it efficient? That's a different story. Because it will only be efficient if the individual being prayed for, if the individual that is the recipient of that will, that manifestation, is open to it. And if the individual is not open, it will not receive it. So then I shouldn't pray for, no, we should. And here, sometimes we say, oh, because if you pray, it is going to be stored somewhere. The prayer is going to be, well, I haven't heard of any safe, any bank that stores prayer or prayers, okay? But I know one thing, if we see prayer as this will of the Spirit, as this manifestation of the Spirit, knowing the Spirit is eternal, so should be its will. So it means that the prayer is always with us. The prayer is not at the moment when we write the name of the person on a prayer book, or when we say something, or we kneel down, or it doesn't really matter. It's not that moment. From that moment on, we are willing, like an eternal sun radiating in all directions. We will radiate to the end of times, is the resonance that we just heard about in the first lecture. Once the resonance kicks in, it is there forever because it depends on us, and we are eternal. So should it be as well. So then those prayers will be there. Now it's a question of that individual, the recipient, to put down the psychological barriers. If that happens, then that individual, any one of us in that situation, will be making use of one of our most precious attributes, the idea that we are social entities and that we are capable of synergism. Now my will combined to the will of those who pray for me, the result of this combination is much, much greater than the sum of all the parts. It is in that sense that we can assist. In that sense that prayer will assist someone in healing, in a healing process. But we need to understand, much like the patient, much like the infirm, that it's the journey that counts. So maybe we should timidly, very shyly, ask for our friend, our beloved one, our family member, to be rid of that disease or that infirmity. But maybe we should will with a lot more power that that individual grow that that individual, become better throughout that process, because that is when the cure, the real cure, not the apparent one, will be achieved. So when you put all these things together, you see why I have so much reticence about this title. Because when we look at the articles, when you look at the publications, we have these issues to consider, and they are not being considered. So perhaps now we should address them as Spiritists, and we should be trying. So if we are going to look at the efficiency, in this case, of the prayer during a healing process, maybe we should redefine what our success, what we mean by success. We should also look at what a prayer really is, and we should evaluate that individual on a regular basis, not as if that individual was with a piece, like a card, and that's either up or down, or like a coin that is tossed, and it's either one or another, heads or tails, right? Because it's the growth that that individual achieves during any process in his or her life that really matters. I think once we address all these issues, we'll be able to remove that question mark from the title of the lecture. We have to remember that we were forged in light, and to light we shall return by our own merit as we progress towards our plenitude. Let us make the journey, which really counts, be luminous as well. Thank you.